Oh, wrong one. We're going to go here first. Yay. Spoilers. Welcome back, everyone. Tonight, I figured I would continue on the project that I started on last week. So the Squirrel app, the one that's designed to hopefully make deploying out desktop apps a lot simpler, at least for me. Hoping to get a full solution out that if other people wanted to deploy into their own Azure environments or whatever, or pick your container hosting of choice, you could do so as well. But just having a simple way so that as you want to publish apps, that there is something kind of wrapped around the installer technology known as Squirrel. And specifically, I am playing with a, we'll say a derivative of that called Cloud Squirrel, because it adds a lot of useful features, lots of cleanup that the regular Squirrel.Windows project doesn't have. And this time around, I am joined by my esteemed colleague, Jared, who has graciously volunteered to come along for the ride and help. I believe that's how we described it, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So some people, he has been in the chat. People have seen him around here for a while. But again, Jared, welcome. I don't know. Is there anything about you that's important to say? We work together.
Quite the opposite.
So, okay. So
thanks for having me on.
Well, and like I told you earlier, your job is to hopefully keep me on track and slow me down, ask me questions, make sure that things are making sense. Okay, so when last we met, I'm going to collapse stuff. We had an endpoint that we were using with Squirrel to retrieve out both the releases file, which is the Squirrel manifest, as well as the individual NuGet package files. And I think where we left it is I had been dumb and wanted to add in things like channel to the query string, and then got stupid and couldn't figure out how to do my routing. It turns out I was making it a lot harder than it needed to be. And all you do is add a parameter and you're done. So apparently at about midnight, my sanity tanks and my ability to code just goes down regardless of the amount of Mountain Dew I've had, which tonight will be Baja flavored. I have both Baja
flavored.
Well, I've got Baja Blast, and then I've got the Baja Mango sitting here in queue. So
you got one on deck.
I've got I just assumed that I was going to need it. So we built this out, and this was more or less working where we left it. I've added in channel for the idea of like the alpha beta prod. And then currently it's a parameter that's passed and I'm doing nothing with it. So it's future proofing because I'm pretty sure I'm going to want it for one of my projects. I just haven't gotten there yet. So.
Hold on. Isn't there an old saying about that?
Yes, it's Yagni, Yagni, Yagni. You ain't gonna need it.
Oh, man.
Yes.
Okay.
But in this case, I actually have a desktop app that I want to use it for. So even though it's not in my Simply Budget app currently, I do have other desktop apps that I want to use this on. So I know where it's going to get used. So
someday.
Well, hopefully not in the too distant future. Let's see. So question, does Squirrel only update one part application? Can it also update additional components? So that's a great question, Justin Bieber. For the most part, it is mostly one part. Now, with that said, you get access to, and I think I've got my Simply Budget stuff. Let me pull this up here real quick. You do get access to some callbacks on like install, uninstall, and that kind of thing. But the only things it really installs outside of your application itself is a handful of dependencies. Like if you recall from last time, there's the setup for like the C++ runtime, was it VC something plus run whatever, that it got tacked on with. So it can do a handful of things, but it's not going to be like a multi-part Wix install where you've got a whole bunch of dependencies and that kind of thing. So mostly one part. If you approach it from the idea that it can only do one part, you'll be right 90% of the time. With a handful of exceptions, and a lot of the exceptions tend to be around the the Windows bits because it sort of needs some of the runtimes for itself. But great question. Okay.
Kevin, do you have this branch pushed right now?
This Squirrel one should be on main with all of this stuff.
Oh, yep. Okay.
So it should be there. I was poking at it for a while. That's actually a good thing. So you'll note here there's a few extra things that I changed since last time. Because before it was just hard-coded up to some URLs on my GitHub. And it was hit, gone, done. And it's still kind of doing that with the 302 redirects back over to the GitHub-y stuff. But I've added in data support behind it. Because at the end of the day, I don't want to hard code this to one repo. I want it to be somewhat data-driven. So let's talk through data-driven stuff because I did do some stuff. So inside my resource group, I have a storage account. If we go storage browser and we look, there is a table in here with this releases table. So, Jared, are you familiar with Cosmos or NoSQL?
I am a little bit. Yeah, the idea of Cosmos being that you could really migrate from a plethora of things, right?
Yeah.
And still stick with like a schema and a setup that you're used to.
Yeah, so it gets weird because it's technically a NoSQL like document store, but you can interface with it with a SQL language.
Interesting.
Yeah, so it's weird because it's a document store, it's a NoSQL store, but I can use, and I don't want to use the word SQL, but a very SQL-y thing to interact with it, and you can even use EF Core on it. In this case, I'm just using table storage directly. And the idea is I wanted to build up a release, a list of releases. So for example, in here, I've got this.
That's interesting because isn't table storage is really by itself is not relational, right?
Correct.
But Cosmos DB allows for this schema-like behavior.
Yes.
Cool.
And so inside of my data folder here, I made a release record type, and it has this base type. And the key part with this, when you use the table storage stuff directly, so you'll note Azure Data Tables, that little bit there. This iTable entry, this is what actually is driving the minimum syntax. Unlike EF, where you can just kind of like write your own POCO and go, for table storage, you have to derive from a table entry because in order to build up the document, it needs things like a partition key, a row key, a timestamp, an E-tag, which is, E-tag is basically versioning. And then in my case, I tacked on an app name because I think, and again, this is thinking, and I'm sure I'll realize I'm an idiot later, is that most of my stuff is largely going to be keyed off of the app name. So you'll note like partition keys with the Cosmos and a lot of the NoSQL store, it's called sharding, where you effectively start putting your data into different groups. And what those groups need to be is completely up to you and very domain driven. So in my case, I think my best partition key is going to be based on app name. So like all the Simply Budget stuff is going to get put together. All of, app number 2 is going to get put together, that kind of thing. I think that makes sense. Again, I'll find out I'm an idiot later and we'll hash that out. But this is per table that you get to decide this. But at least for this base record, which the base record then has derived class of release, it builds up a few other things. And for release, I figured, because one of the things that we ran into last time before was the subtle difference between version number, git tag, and like release name. All of those things were kind of so I was like, you know what? I'm going to actually make those properties in here just so that there's a mapping, because I know what's going to happen is as soon as I say, well, they have to match, I can just about guarantee I'm going to walk myself right into a corner and then step on my own foot, because that's what's going to happen. If we go back to my, oh, I didn't open it. Let's see. And then, yeah, so if we go here, right? If we look, I did also get the pipeline working here. So you'll note test release. So this guy here, see green circle. And I only
Green
had
is
to
good.
I only had to delete a few runs to make it look this pretty. But if we go and look at this guy, what he is doing, so he's doing the build, he's doing the publish, and I think most of this is what we were doing before. You'll note he's still hard coded to a particular version of Cloud Squirrel, but I'm ignoring that for the moment. And then Justin Bieber, your question earlier about what it can install, this is my comment about the redistributable stuff there. But I did get this thing going through setting up a pack version based on the ref name, and this thing triggers when a release is created. So when it makes a release, it triggers, grabs that name, slaps it into here. So right now my limitation that I've put on myself is your release name has to be the version, and then it'll do the rest. Which seems simple. I think it's simple. We might, and then it goes through and it uploads all the files and away we go. But for the tables, go ahead.
So each time you update, each time the version number changed, you would have to go in there and update that by hand?
Well, so the idea, what I think I want, and again, emphasis on think, because I haven't actually done this yet. I think what I want my release process to be is when I want to kick out a release is simply budget, right? I get all the code in on main, make it happy, and then I want to come over here on releases. I want to hit something like, see? Told you I had to delete a few things. I should probably go clean some of these up. Yeah, we'll delete those in a minute. I think I want to create a release and say, okay, this is going to be, 1.1, right? And then 1.1.0. And this is the version that's actually going to end up going. But right now it's going to have a tag and the release name are going to match. The thought is that at some point that pipeline is going to need a call to my service and say, okay, here's a release number, here's a tag, do all the mapping. Because that's going to need to be a thing. Because as long as they match, that get ref that I was using will line up. But I want it to basically pass both values, because that GitHub action will know both the tag and the release name. And if it knows both, it might as well send both. And then if I want to make this like v1.1.0 or whatever, that's fine, because now the service has a mapping to it. So I think that's what I want for my release, because what will happen is when I create that release, the other action kicks off, it builds up all the files, and then it goes and attaches them to the release for me, which I think is just awesome. But I'm biased, so I may actually go through. I spent a great deal of time fighting. It ended up being really stupid simple to attach the files to a release. Like, it seems so simple looking at it here, because there's the built-in one from GitHub for doing the release. They abandoned, and they linked to a bunch of other ones, and I kind of poked around at them, and this one looked reasonable, and I went, you know what, let's go with it. And so it ended up being this stupid simple to say, hey, gen the release notes for me and attach all the files. And I went, oh, that's kind of cool. So
yeah, you'd imagine it'd be more than that.
Yeah, I'll create the release in GitHub. Because at some point Kevin has to do a thing when it's time for release. But I think if my job is click create release, set the version and hit go and walk away, I can accept that.
Yeah.
But as part of this project, I think what I want to build as well is a little CLI app that handles that Cloud Squirrel pack operation as well as calling out to the service. Because I want that right now is now the ugly part for the WPF app, is doing that Cloud Squirrel invocation and doing the call to the service. And so I'm like, I should just wrap that up in a nice little package and ship it. Okay, but going back to where it is, on all of this stuff, it's a little convoluted because I made it complicated for reasons that I'm still not 100% sure I agree with. But
job security.
Correct. And this actually lines up with a question you asked me the other day of building up Lambda expressions. So you'll note the version in here, this get file method, is optional. And the reason it's optional is the version matters when we're getting the NuGet package files, But for like the manifest, we always just want to grab latest. And so I needed to pass in an expression, a query. So these lambdas never get executed. Like we could put breakpoints on these, and this breakpoint will never get hit because it's an expression, not a delegate. But in order to do this, you'll note I have to do the version null check outside of the lambda and then build this up. Otherwise, you have to do some weird expression tree stuff to put these things together. And in my mind, this is just simpler. So if version is null, we're just going to grab all of the releases where the name and the channel match. Otherwise, we'll grab where the name, channel, and version match. And then down here, it iterates over all the items and just finds the one with the latest version. And that's what gets returned.
So when does that expression get evaluated then?
So that expression comes into here and then gets passed off to this query async. This is effectively the equivalent of what you might see with like an EF core where clause.
Okay.
So if you were to, just like in EF core, how you do where with the lambda, this would do the same type of thing where it's not going to execute this as a delegate. It's going to parse it, turn it into SQL or Cosmos language, send it to the server, execute it, get some results, come back. And then async for each. And the big reason for this is because the results, if you look at this items thing, this is one of the things that bothers me. Okay. So everybody who argues about whether you should name async methods with an async suffix, you'll note this is an async method that I'm not awaiting. And it really bothers me that they named it that way. Because I really want to slap that await in there. And you can't. Because
so it's not truly... So is it just named poorly?
Well, so sort of. And this is one of those things, because when async and await first came out, it was basically for single methods. Right? You invoke the async method, you await the result, and you're good to go. The problem is in C# 9, I think it was 9, don't quote me, they added async enumerables. Because you'll note I have an await in front of my for each.
Yeah.
So even though I can't await this method, I am expected to await the iteration of the return value. So this for each may end up making multiple calls back to the server to get next item, get next item, get next item, get next item all the way through. Which gets to be a little weird-ish, sorta.
That's really... I don't think I've ever seen that before.
Yeah. I don't think this is common under the Microsoft libraries. And this is one of those cases where if you have a method that returns an async enumerable, should you name it with an async suffix? And it gets weird because the same arguments that people make for whether you should name it with an async suffix on a task returning or a value task returning method start to fall apart a little bit. And yeah, it gets...
So if you miss the wait on line 48, will it compile?
I don't think so, because because in this case it can't, because this thing doesn't implement IEnumerable. It only implements async enumerable, if I remember correctly. We can check.
So if you casted that then to like a list async, could you then use the await up above and not have to use it?
Oh, like on the end of this guy, do a to list async, or I may not have the methods set up.
And that's a rabbit hole. I'm just thinking if this was me right now and I'm trying to use this thing and I'm getting this, I don't even think I'm trying to await the query async.
Yeah.
And it's saying, you can't do that. I'm like, okay, well, what do I do? I would not think about throwing that await in the for each.
Right.
For each.
And believe me, I did the same thing. I slapped the await on the front, got the compiler, and went, huh?
Yeah.
And then
I'm glad I saw that.
And then I
ever run into it.
Yeah.
Again.
And then the first thing I did, because I did, I was bad. I had my var in here, and I'm like, wait, what type is this? And then when then of course I had to look into it. Once I saw the async enumerable, I went, oh, okay, and then off to the races. But it was one of those, until I saw that, I was as confused as I'm sure you were on doing it. But the other thing that I slapped on here, and this is definitely a Yagni moment, is you'll note after it gets the release, then it needs to go back and get the file for the given release. Now, I could have taken this release object. Why did I put my question mark there? Like an idiot. Okay. Like I could have taken this release object because it has the tag and whatnot. I could have said, oh, well, let's just slap on like the root repository URL or something, right? And then I started thinking, I'm like, well, root repository URL really does assume that I'm hosting this on GitHub or similar. What if I want to put it somewhere else? And I was like, do I really want to bite that off? Yagni. And then I'm like, yeah, let's do it anyway. So you'll note instead of putting things that were specific to GitHub on here, I created provider version, and provider data. Because one more layer of abstractions. So the idea is, and you'll note down here, it makes this called a get provider, where it uses a provider factory and calls create provider. Now this is going to start to look really dumb because you'll note there's not a lot of options here. And in fact, I'm missing one. This one should exist too. New local file provider factory. See?
I have to say, I've never seen a switch written like that either.
Oh,
is that fairly new in C#?
It is. This is called a switch expression. When you'll note that the value goes to the other side, and it actually gets worse than this. We can go like this and go, you know what? Lambda body the whole thing. This is a one-line method now. Because why not?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
You're getting too fancy for me.
Well, it starts to get really easy. So the switch expressions are not nearly as complicated as oftentimes what people will do. So rather than having switch paren value, you move the value in front of the switch. And then rather than having to write case statements, you put expressions in front of a lambda for the return.
Sure.
An emphasis on expression for the lambda. So this is a case where you're a switch expression, where a switch is normally a jump table like behavior of if value jump here.
Right.
This thing can start to be a more advanced, like
because can you do multi-line after the arrow?
Multi-line after the arrow. Sort of. The key limitation is it has to be an expression. So you could cheat with multi-line by just having this be a method invocation, and then poof,
right,
you get the equivalent. There's no equivalent to like the fall through or go to label type stuff because it is different. But all of the pattern matching syntax that works, you can end up doing in here as well. And then the underscore is a special else case. So where normally you'd have
default,
the equivalent of the default one to fall through. But you can start doing much more advanced stuff that you can't do in a case statement because you get all of the all the pattern matching magic.
Sure. I'm just thinking syntactic sugar. That looks a lot cleaner than having the kind of old way of doing a switch.
Yeah.
Which is I like it because, like Robert Martin always talks about, if you ever find yourself writing a switch statement, you should just be making a factory. Like don't put, that's like the only place that it's okay. And that's exactly what you did here. I like it.
Well, yeah, and it ended up making a factory and hard-coded. And there was fancier ways to go about this, and I tried to resist the urge to keep adding complexity. I'm like, stop it, Yagni, and then I stopped. But this is what happens when I don't have somebody like you to wrangle me in, is I start adding complexity. But, so you'll note, naturally, the GitHub provider factory is itself a factory, because what should a factory create but more factories? Because that makes sense.
The factory.
Naturally. But the idea being that the root provider factory is taking in a provider name and a version. And so the first level says, okay, find me the right factory for this provider. And then that factory says, okay, find me the right one for the given version. Because I don't want to have to go through and as I update these providers, fight with backwards compatibility all the time. So my thought was, anytime I make a breaking change, I'm just going to make another from V1 to V2 to V whatever. That way I don't have to fight breaking changes all the way back. Because at the end of the day, these guys here, like this guy, his interface is very simple. Get file, which is about as stupid as simple as it needs to be. And I passed in way too much. I overpassed data on the parameters of here's the entire release, here's the whole file name, you figure out what to do from there. I don't want to think too hard. So the GitHub provider one then ends up building out that same URL like what we did before. But the key part is that that provider data block that I was talking about is expected to be a JSON block that in this case will just contain the repository URL. So you'll note one-liner class. So a simple record, simple positional record that I'm just going to deserialize out to get the repository URL. And then this also means that as I do releases, if I decide that, up through releases 1, 2, and 3, I'm going to be hosted on GitHub, and then V4, I'm going to move my installer files somewhere else, I can do that without breaking my update process. Because normally that's the issue with the Squirrel updater, is the updater has to have a fixed URL that it hits against to get that manifest. And so if you change where that manifest is, you now have this problem where you have to push out a new release with the updated Squirrel pointing to a different location. But with this, the idea is hopefully this API stays constant and doesn't move around on you. And then the files can move wherever they need to. So if at the end of the day I decide, you know what, we're not going to 302 people, we're going to actually serve the files up directly, sure. We can do that later, and my installers don't need to change. They're always just pointed at my service.
Interesting. So how much duplication are you kind of expecting then for each of the versions?
Probably. So I'm not actually expecting a lot of versions. That's the thing
Gotcha.
I don't expect that I'm going to have to change this GitHub provider much. Because right now, it's literally just it's a one-liner building a URI, just concatenating URI pieces together. So I don't think I'm going to have a lot. But that is a good question I don't know. My assumption is I won't have a lot of versions of these. Because at first I was like, well, maybe I should make the version a string and have 3 parts, major, minor, blah, blah. I'm like, you know what? That's adding a lot of complexity for something that I don't expect to version that much. Int. That's 2.1 billion versions. If I need more than that, once I get above 5, I'll probably change my mind on what I'm doing. So I really didn't need it even that big. So that was my thought. So that's as far as I got. I built all of that. So I got all of the file stuff. So you'll note this app version or this app information stuff is just all it is doing is getting this release and calling get file. That's all it's doing. So this class, which is it's in the controller namespace and it really needs to migrate at some point. I just didn't know where to put it, so I left it there. It's effectively what's going to replace this app map. Why is there still a reference to this? Repo root. Huh. That's not needed. Burn it. Okay. Because right now, not found is going to be, did this guy return back something or not? So they were just going to make some changes while we're in here. So that's where I got to. And then I realized, I was like, oh, okay, let's test it. And as soon as I went to run a test, I realized there's no data in my database. It's really hard to test a query when you haven't written the insert yet. And then I was like, oh, well, let's go write the insert. And then I made an unfortunate realization. So I kind of started writing an endpoint that's going to be the, hey, update a given app, and here's the tag, version, and channel for it. So simple, easy. And then I realized something. These are all unauthenticated requests. And that's a major problem if hypothetically you decide you want to be mean to me one day and you want to go and write simply budget vnext and host it on your stuff and you want to call update. Yeah, that bad.
Yeah.
So, and this is also probably not enough parameters either, because I started looking at it, I'm like, well, hold on. My release, in order to build one of these things, I need, well, I don't technically need channel, but I at least need tag and version. And then I need a provider that's pointed to GitHub with a root URL. So that's going to need to get specified. And then I started realizing, that's a problem. So
forgive me.
Yeah.
And forgive me, Justin Bieber, if I'm the only one that's kind of having a hard time tracking this.
Nope.
Can you just give me a really spark notes of the kind of the use case of this? You do something and it walks through these things that we've been talking about and spits something out.
Yes. So this endpoint here, this ends up getting invoked when you fire up the app. In this case, I'll just use Simply Budget as my example. When it fires up and it does its update check, which I don't remember where it is. I assume it must be buried underneath this handle events. It will invoke the update endpoint and say, first, give me the manifest to determine if there are updates. And if there is an update, then it's going to call to say, okay, now give me the files for those updates. And it handles, if there's multiple updates, getting all the intermediate ones and all that. So it'll make...
And we're talking about updates for what?
For the app itself. So
interesting.
So
okay.
For example, Simply Budget right now, V1, if it's out there and you fire it up, it's looking for V, 1 plus, whatever comes next. 1120, whatever. So it's looking for something that's beyond the current one.
Okay.
So once it gets itself all set up and ready to go, that's what it's going to end up doing. And right now, if I bounce back here, where did I set it up? See, now you're making me question where I did it. I'm trying to remember where I set the config for Simply Budget to point at my service to grab the updates. And I am not recalling where that is. And I'm feeling stupid now. See?
Don't. Because clearly I wasn't getting it. So the use case for this is I'm using some software that Kevin wrote, and when I run it, the first thing it does is it goes out there and says, hey, is there any updates? And it says, yes, there is updates. It uses Cloud Squirrel to then pass what I have and then say, give me back what I need as far as an update.
Correct.
Awesome.
Yeah. So, and Cloud Squirrel handles the complicated part of the operation of doing the install. Thank goodness. All I'm doing is putting my service in the middle between your running app and where that manifest and files are, such that I can effectively control what you get back, which is part of the idea with the channels, because right now it only goes to a single URL, because when it goes to check for updates, it needs to know where to look. And in other apps that I've built, I've gone through and inside the app, I've said, okay, based upon some configuration, if you're like alpha channel, go to this URL. But if you're beta channel, go to this URL, and that kind of thing. And it gets to be a little yucky, especially when somebody's like, oh, well, now I want to start switching, or now I, heaven forbid, want to change one of those URLs. It's like, oh, you're killing me. You're killing me. Don't do that. So the idea is this thing will be effectively that middleman doing the routing for you.
We're adding another layer of abstraction, which is a good thing, right?
Yes. And the other thing that I'm hoping to avoid is I want to make it so that when I spin my next WPF app and I want to add an installer to it, I don't want it to be hard. Right. Because ideally what I would like to have is add NuGet package and then probably either a template or a small snippet or similar with hopefully one step for a GitHub action. I'm hoping it's that small of, after I've done the work of compiling, building the app, doing the .NET publish, all of that jazz. I want it to be one step for publish as installer and then not thinking anymore. That's my goal. I'd like to get it down.
Okay.
That low.
Thank you. Sorry, it was a detour,
no,
but I was like, man, I got to get a little better.
That's at least
an
on-track detour. And it hopefully makes sense of what all this is. And like I said, I added in all these abstractions. So what I want to do next is I want to get the inserting into that releases table done, because that needs to happen so that we can actually test the querying. And initially I had in my head, I'm like, oh, I know what we'll do. We'll do the standard way that like NuGet and everyone else works. There'll be a pre-shared API key, right? That you use when you're going to call the service. That way, anybody without a valid API key can't call my service, and I don't have to worry about you hijacking my installer with, your release and bypass me. I'm like, okay, perfect. That'll work. That way. And then I was like, okay, well, to do that, we need like Hmac auth and all this stuff. And I'm like, or hypothetically, I do none of that. We get it working and we add that later.
I like that. Simplify it.
That's the big brain right there. Because I was like, let's do all this Hmac stuff, and I'm like, no. Go back to basics. Make it work, make it right, make it fast.
Yeah.
In that order.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay.
So what's kind of interesting about this though is with this endpoint, the client needs to know. Obviously, it knows now. Is it calling and saying this is my current information, or is this calling saying this is the information I need?
That's a great question. So the way Cloud Squirrel ends up working, and let me actually just bump over to the releases because we can just look at the file.
You would think with I'm just trying to think like a standard API. You're saying get from the updates resource, and then you're giving those parameters. So to me as an API user, I would think that means give me what I am providing to you, not saying this is what I have, can you give me the next thing?
Yeah, but it actually does work. It works the opposite.
Oh, okay.
So what it ends up doing is it first requests the manifest, and then locally the app determines what updates it needs. So this is just a file hash to make sure that that when it downloads the file that there's been no monkey business. Right. And I'm trying to remember what the third one is. File size, perhaps? I can't recall.
Is that not on the controller? Oh no, this isn't. We're not looking at parameters.
Yeah,
for that.
this is just if you were to use Cloud Squirrel by itself. When it fires up and says, "Is there an update?" Its first thing is to download this manifest, and once it gets this manifest, it looks at its current version, and because you could imagine that there could be, there's version 1.1 here and 1.3 and 1.31 because we made a mistake, and then we finally get to 2.0. And so it downloads this and it goes, okay, where am I in this list? Okay, now what versions do I need to download to install? And these ones have the word full next to them. There's also, you'll see Delta lines in here as well.
Oh,
because the client can either say download the full NuGet package, which is big because it contains the whole app, or you can download a bunch of smaller Delta packages, which are like, especially in a WPF app, most of the time a lot of your DLLs aren't changing. Your main one changes. Maybe you update some NuGet packages and a few of those change, but a lot of them will stay constant from release to release.
And that kind of answers what my next question would be is, why does it matter where you're at in the list? Just give me the most up-to-date.
Right.
But if you have partials out there.
And that's the thing is, if the client itself, the app itself can determine whether it wants to accept deltas or whether it wants to jump to a full release.
Sure.
And so based upon what it decides, it will then call back saying, okay, now give me this file. Now give me this file. And so it does make the sweeping assumption that it has a base URL, and the base URL, it expects to be able to find the releases manifest, and then right alongside it, it expects to be able to call to that URL and get these files. So whatever it is, wherever that base URL is expected to be able to do that kind of mapping back and forth. Part of the reason for doing that is there are some other features. I don't know if Cloud Squirrel implemented them too. I assume so, because they didn't delete anything. but you can actually set additional parameters here that allow you to do a tiered rollout. Like only update 20% of my clients. Which starts to get weird because you're like, wait a minute, if the client's doing the evaluation, how do they know if they're inside the 20% bucket or not?
You don't, I guess.
Right, that's where it gets fun. So it ends up doing some like hashing stuff and saying, well, if I hash and land in 20%, then I'm in, otherwise I'm out. So it gets to be kind of a fun thing, but you can do effectively a tiered rollout if you want to say only give half my users this. And so, again, future Kevin thinks that it would be cool to be able to not just ship this manifest back wholesale, but maybe modify it in transit to do stuff like that on the fly. But effectively, I need these other things generated. Let's see. So question, are budget clients synchronized with each other or as a standalone application? Justin Bieber, in the case of My Simply Budget, it is very much a standalone application. It has a SQLite database, so everything stays local. It is a simple WPF application with a target user base of exactly 1. And that one user is very happy with it. Because it's me. Well, mostly happy with it.
And by budget clients, he's talking about your specific app, right?
I assume so. Let's see. Okay. If an app has skipped several releases, will it be safe to update after skipping 3 or 4 versions? So going from 1.0 to 1.3.1. So the expectation is yes. So it's supposed to be able to, if it knows that it's on 1.0 and 1.3.1 is latest, and it applies Delta packages, so it'll end up doing, in this case, 1, 2, 3 downloads, because instead of a full, there'll be a Delta sitting alongside of it. And so it'll pull down the 3 Delta packages and then apply them in order. Because when you're applying Deltas, order very much matters. So it should be as safe as doing it. There shouldn't be an issue with it. Does it update the application completely from scratch, or does it only add the deltas? So that is up to the client to decide when it does the update call. I think that's actually in the, if I go here and I go docs, I believe that is in, I think it's in using update process. Yeah, so this guy here is, I think, what you're asking about. So it'll pull down the individual deltas, and then a new full package is created from the previous full package and the delta files. So pulls down the deltas and applies an order, and then installs the new version.
It sounds like it would depend, though, right? Like if you had, a 1.0 and then a 1.1 and a 1.2, and you're on 1.0 and 2.0 comes out and that's a full, you wouldn't download all the deltas for the 1 dots up to 1.3, right? You would just jump right to the 1.2 and it would be a whole new guy at that point, right? Because it's a full package.
Well, so you'll note here it says the update manager determines whether to download deltas or latest full package. Right? And so in this case, by calculating which one requires less total downloading. So the answer is
interesting.
It depends. And that's that actually explains why I was a little confused. File size. That would be why it cares about the file size.
Oh, man, that's a really smart application, because you could be just a sliver of a delta away from being on version 2. Whatever to version 3. And they say, do we just download that delta to bump you there, or do we just or do you would you need more? And so we just give you the whole thing.
Yeah,
that's very cool.
Yeah, it's I will say the Squirrel installer, even without Cloud Squirrel, but Squirrel.Windows is really amazing. The part that impressed me the most the first time I used it is it has a splash screen option, and most of the time you will never get to see it. Because the splash screen, I'm trying to remember, it will only display if the install takes more than 2 seconds, 3 seconds. There's a small timer in single digit of seconds that it'll only pop the splash screen after that amount of time has passed. Because occasionally some apps are bigger, and at the end of the day, it is having to do like moving files around on the file system. So it can only go like if you've got a slow spinny disk, it can only move stuff so fast. But in a lot of cases, you never see it because the install's that like that, which is in my mind just absolutely impressive.
Really, it really is.
Yeah, and just to be with the question of would it be safer to uninstall everything and install a new version from scratch? It's actually, there is a clever thing that it does do inside of Windows, because Windows supports a rollback feature that you'll see sometimes inside of your control panel or settings on newer Windows, where when you highlight an app, you'll have uninstall as an option, but occasionally you'll have a rollback option. So if the installer for the app has registered appropriately for upgrades, oftentimes it will keep the previous version when you do an install, such that if there's a problem, it gives the user the option, just say, go back to what I was previous on. And it literally holds both folders side by side. And Squirrel does this. If you look at your local app data directory, you'll see the directory for your app, and you'll see like, what is it, current and previous, or it's version, or maybe it's named with the version number. I can't remember exactly, but you'll see multiple directories once you've done your second install where it's actually holding on to the previous version so that the user can click that rollback button inside of control panel or settings to get back to it. So it really, like, again, Squirrel is doing the heavy lifting. Let's be clear here. I'm just mucking with some files and URLs. It's doing the hard work of like dealing with the operating system. And it's doing it in style. All while being named after a small rodent.
I was just trying to connect the dots a little bit of
I do.
Where did the name Squirrel come from? I'm like, are you like squirreling away? Like,
I have no idea.
Version nuts? I don't know.
Because you'll note if we go back to Squirrel Windows, which this was originally forked from, the tagline, it's like click once, but works.
That's just like straight below.
Yeah.
Wow.
To be fair, this tagline was written, Click Once got a big rework around the .NET Core 3.1, 3.0 era. I don't remember exactly. But about the time desktop apps got onto .NET Core, Click Once got a revamp. And it got a teeny bit better in the revamp. And it got a teeny bit better because they ported it from Framework to Core. But a lot of the underlying stuff was probably like Click Once is great when it works, and oh my word, a miserable nightmare when it doesn't. And it downloads a ton of stuff. It can be. I
don't think I've ever used Click Once.
You actually have if you've installed Chrome. The Chrome. They may have changed it, but at one point in time, the Chrome bootstrapper, so not the actual installer, the thing that grabbed the installer, was using Click Once for the Windows installer, because it was a very convenient way to get an installer onto it. My biggest gripe with Click Once was it did not handle network latency or spotty networks at all. And so one of the apps I was building, we were actually trying to distribute to people across the world. And we're spoiled in the US. We have reasonable internet in most places. Across the world, that is not true. And Click Once would constantly give us problems, especially if you didn't have like global CDNs distributing your files. Like if somebody across the world tries to download from a server in the US, there's a lot of latency there. And Click Once,
sure.
It is not tolerant of any bit flips at all. It just freaks out and dies. Rollback to previous version of a client is probably suitable for single applications. For client server, the API of the client may no longer match. That is true, though the issue of the API from the client to server matching actually in a lot of cases, I tried to design around that not ever being a problem, because if your client and server always have to match exactly, that means you have to time your rollouts. So, sorry, answering question in chat. And I usually try to avoid, it's usually best to make it so that you can roll out your server, update, and then update the client. Let's see. Click Once is good for small program distributed within a local network. Make a small helper for employees and update periodically with local network. Small programs just, it looks like it just posted twice. Yeah, and especially on a local network where you don't worry about like those network latency problems or issues, it can work well. And it is stupid easy to do. It is literally right click, publish, next, finish. I think I got the right number next in there. I think that's as hard as click once is to get started with, which is why it got popular. Okay, all of that stuff. Okay, so let's see if we can actually write something to that releases table, because I think that's what we want to do. One thing I will call out, you'll note I did check in all of my code, and I warned you, Jared, that you can't run it because you are not me and you will fail. The reason you will fail is the Azure data tables library. You have to use a table service client to connect to it. Not surprising. There's a client to connect to it. And
only one's allowed?
Well, no. So I'm using this default Azure Credentials to authenticate, which this is actually a really clever class. So this class looks through your running system to say, hey, what account do I have? Hey, let's sign in with that. So it'll check your Visual Studio account, your VS Code account. It'll look for managed identity. It'll look for your AZ CLI logins. It'll look for your PowerShell account. It'll go through, I think, 8 different options trying to find an account to log in with. And then it's going to use it, which is really cool. The problem is it's hard-coded to my storage account. And so unless I add you, it doesn't matter what account it finds. You know off. You know where.
So, but that's kind of a good thing. Going back to your controller, you know, that you were saying we have that endpoint that you don't need to be authorized to call. Would it even make it through the completion, or would it right there? It would hit that and not have the credentials.
Correct.
And so die out.
Well, this happens on startup. So, and that's right now, I think my app service is actually failing. So I was going to actually suggest going and fixing this because, and the reason it's probably why I suspect it's failing is because on startup, and this is probably not a great place to do it, but I did it here just to validate my connection to the table storage. So I register this stuff up with DI, which is great. And then I come down here, and because I registered it as a scoped client, which I wasn't totally clear on the documentation whether it was supposed to be a singleton or not. It seemed like it was. I saw some things that seemed to indicate that it was thread safe and could be a singleton. I'm like, you know what? I'm not going to mess with it. Scoped it is. So created a DB scope, pulled the thing right back out of the DI container. And then when you get this table service client, you end up having to create an individual table client for each table inside of there, which felt a little weird to me, but I'm like, whatever. And then create if not existing. So goes through, creates the table, and I slapped the table name in here. Just, I don't know, it seemed like a reasonable idea at the time. But this works because it's logged in as me, and I have access to it. It was actually interesting, though, because I am an owner in my own account. Not surprising. But being an owner doesn't actually give you permission to create tables, as I discovered. Which seemed wrong to me on a number of levels. But apparently owners are not allowed to muck with data, which I believe is an actual explicit design decision. But if I check access, view my access, I had to go through and actually explicitly grant myself storage table data contributor in order to be able to create tables. And the problem I'm fairly confident I'm running into now is, so you'll note my role assignments. There's a couple things being inherited from the subscription, and then there's me. And there is nothing that would give access to my app service, because my app service is not logged in as me. So what I think we need to do is come over to the app service and turn on managed identity and then grant it access to it. So if we come over here, so there's a handy flow chart I should show you that one of my other teams has put together that simply says, is the problem managed identity? Yes, fix managed identity. No, you're wrong. It's always managed identity. And round and round we go. So it's both a blessing and a curse. But so if we turn on managed identity, and I'm just going to do system aside. So this will end up effectively spinning the equivalent of like a service principal for me.
It's going to create a user, which then you'll go over to your table storage and say, this user has access.
Correctamundo. And I believe that.
So why do we use the term service principal? Is that just another word for saying this service as a user?
That's a good question. I'm not fully confident in where the history of the word service principal come from. It predates cloud stuff.
And maybe, I guess I just meant maybe maybe it doesn't work the way I think it does. Mm-hmm. And so that's, but.
No, in this case, so a managed identity is an identity inside of your, in this case, Azure Active Directory. It shows up as an app registration, I believe. Because it's managed, Azure goes through and deals with all of the painful overhead. So for example, if you were to just manually spin the user yourself, simple things like, oh, what happens if I need to cycle the credentials because somebody, compromised them, or even just doing the credential cycling on a regular cadence because that's good practice. You don't have to do any of that. Azure manages that for you, which is wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
But that's effectively all it's doing under the hood is it's building that user. I will have to look at where the term service principal came from. I am not actually sure. Oh, and I just went back to the wrong place. That's a good one to look up. So in terms of what we need to do, we're going to do a role assignments, add role assignment. And then we need the storage table. And so in our case, I'm going to go contributor. And I went round and round around whether it should have contributor or just reader. And ultimately, I think I just decided I'm going with contributor.
So the app service, will it ever write to the table?
Well, so it's going to need to write in the case of the endpoint that is going to add to that releases. And this create, if not existing, the create requires write access as well.
So if that table was ever deleted,
correct,
on accident. So yeah, that sounds like you don't have a choice then, right?
Yes, and because of you can get a little bit more fine grained. I am on the MSDN low tier account, so I have fewer roles and custom roles available to me than what would be available on enterprise level stuff. Gotcha. So let's see. There's the identity. Next. Yes, review and assign. We're going to give it data contributor. There it is. Review and assign.
Now, but there was an option there to make it a service principal. Did we not want to do that?
Sorry, hold on. Let me go back. Show me. Oh, hey, Josh.
It was the last step on there.
So see, now you're making me question what I think I know.
So right there, you had managed identity instead of service principal.
So this is this radio button is determining what shows up when you click select members. So This is either querying the regular users, groups, and service principals in AAD, and this is querying the managed identities in your subscription.
Gotcha. All right.
Yeah, not actually setting it itself.
Good to know.
So,
see, this is the stuff I need to learn.
Yes.
This is...
well, and the other thing to know, when you change permissions in IAM, you got to give it a couple minutes. I changed it, ran it, failed, ran it again, failed, and then I spent the next 10 minutes going, why isn't it working? Why isn't it working? And after banging my head against it, I ran it a third time, worked just fine. I'm like, dang nabbit. So the solution, when you change IAM permissions, get up, get yourself a coffee, grab a Mountain Dew, check email, then run it again. Depending on how far away your Mountain Dew fridge is, maybe you just rerun it at that point. It's really up to you. So I think that should be enough to get it. Oh, thank you, Leaf141. That should be enough to give the app service permissions in. Okay, because I would like to see this thing actually do something useful. At some point, I'm going to leave it to do here. To-do config. We'll be specific, config URI. Because at the end of the day, if I expect people to ever clone this and do useful stuff with it, they should probably be able to point this at their own storage account.
That's a feature.
Yeah. Right now, the target user base is 1, and the 1 user deems that a to-do comment is sufficient. Okay, so in the controller, let's go to the app controller here. Hey, Robert, loosely WPF related. Okay, so the first thing we need to actually get. So here's a question. This guy here should probably be the one to do it, because he's already got the table service client and all set up. And I guess in this case, what I really want is we're gonna go stupid simple to start. We're gonna take version and we're gonna apply it in both cases. We're gonna apply version and tag, and we're gonna just assume that they're equal. Call it a day, right? And then we're gonna do provider, and I don't know. This should not be hard coded, but I don't know.
I feel like those are famous last words.
Yes,
this should not be hard coded, but for
now. For now. In the interest of simplicity and testing,
absolutely,
we're going to just straight up hard code this. So we'll set the provider version. I need to look at what the structure of this thing was. Repository URL. So it needs that. We're gonna slap that in, and if I can do JSON freehand, we'll see. There's a real good chance that I can't, and I'm an idiot. So that's a thing. So it wants that. Okay, so that will add an entry. From here, with a channel, add a version. That seems simple. I don't think it needs to be more complicated than that. Good enough. Okay, so on the endpoint here, this guy now needs a app information instance in order to do something with it. So do the thing. Always bothers me that it makes it public, but it does. And then null check it because I'm paranoid. Probably. Robert asks how it's going. I don't know if you're watching Twitch chat too, Jared.
Oh. Is this... I'm sorry, Robert. Robert's.
Robert, yes. Also from the pod chat, if that helps narrow it down.
Oh, hi, Robert. It's going pretty good. I embarrassingly, last week's stream, I was watching from bed, and so I fell asleep like halfway through. So I am trying to get caught up on Cloud Squirrel, and what the objective here is. But we're putting the pieces together.
Let's see.
How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for asking.
No.
Sorry, just giving you crap. Let's see. Production. And then this guy wanted a version. Okay, so I'm realizing I'm an idiot. We just come into the channel and shout WPF all the time. Yes.
No matter what's going on, I like it.
Yes. Okay, so that is going to be... and here's a good example of why not naming it with async is problematic. Okay. Jared, remind me, are you familiar with ASP.NET Core Web APIs or not so much?
We're used to just doing .NET 6 like BFF APIs.
Okay.
But I kind of have an idea what's going on here. Yeah, for the most part, controllers certainly look the same.
Cool. Yeah, so this isn't anything overly fancy in terms of passing it. So we're gonna just say if this thing creates, call it a day, return a 200. I don't know. Let's run it. I don't know if I can.
You've got Swagger already set up for it, right?
Well, by already set up, I did not disable it when I went .NET New. I left it there.
That's set up enough for me.
It came in the box, and I went, yes, thank you.
You left the weather forecast. Nice.
Did I leave that in there?
Well, I mean, maybe not in the controller, but I still just see it in your Solution Explorer.
Oh, where did I leave it? Weather.
I think it was.
Oh, you're right. Dang it. I nuked the controller. Forgot about that one. Where'd it go? This one. Okay, so if we do update, so we're going to pretend like we're doing this. Try this out. So we're going to pretend like we're adding simply budget. We're going to add version 1.0.0. Tag is unused. Channel is optional. Execute.
Well, and will you remind me again what the tag and the channel are?
So channel is unused. It is expected to be things like alpha, beta.
That's the Yagni.
That's the Yagni one. Tag is expected to be the GitHub tag.
Sure. Okay, which will match the version.
Which currently will match the version.
Gotcha.
So, and then naturally we get a 500 of everything blowing up. So that's exciting.
It looks like you got it looks like a 400. Oh wait, well, that's weird. Yeah.
So here's the thing. Because it's in debug mode, it's giving verbose output. So I believe I got a 400 from the client, which resulted in an exception thrown, which was a 500 from my service.
Oh, do you just have? Is there just a default kind of error controller or handler?
Well,
setup
for web APIs going through here, it's going to depend a little bit on whether you're running debug or not, because you'll note it has I should say if you're in the development environment or not, for some of the Swagger stuff. So Swagger is grabbing the 500 and grabbing the contents out and displaying them. So this is actually what's in the body of the 500 response. But the table client is logging all kinds of stuff, which is currently helpful because, yeah, there's your 400 bad requests. So apparently I went to insert, it had a bad request and decided it hated me.
And what's that for?
I can't say I blame it.
What's that first line say at the top? Scroll all the way up. The values are not specified for all properties in the entity.
So that's at least useful. So what did I not specify? That's at least mildly helpful. So let's see. Tag, channel, version, provider version, provider data. Row key will be set from version, so that one will be there. Because releases, I figured they get partitioned based on app name, but keyed on version. Because for a given app name, I can't have duplicate versions.
Okay.
So that made sense to me. I think the easiest thing to do is, let's just do this. I'm going to pull you out. I'm going to put you right here. I'm going to stop you there. And I'm going to put a breakpoint.
But it's kind of interesting here, though. So that error would make sense to me if you were using, our table storage doesn't really have a schema, right?
Well,
if there isn't one, it'll create a new one. Does it even know? So to me, it seems like that shouldn't matter.
You make an excellent point. I bet you so you're right. It doesn't have a schema, sort of. You are on live with all of IntelliHack 2022.
Aren't you guys supposed to be working? What are you doing? Clock's ticking.
Now this is coding. Wow. So we've got all of the. So okay, hold on. Quick shout out. Because this is important. This is important. So for anyone who has no idea what's being talked about here.
Hack Street's back.
All right. I can just because I work there doesn't mean I can spell it. Okay. So anybody who wants to follow along, there's Intellitech's Twitter. Go give them a follow. They deserve it. Right now, our interns are doing a hackathon until I think like 2:00 tomorrow.
Yeah.
Joseph's in the chat. He can correct me. And you can get all of the cool details on the awesome interns that we have, because we arguably do have 6 of...
Are those all the rappers? Click that image. Are those all... You ate all of them?
Well, bear in
Those
mind.
are high chews.
Okay.
Oh.
Okay. We do have a problem, Ben.
Yeah.
That's a mug root beer.
Chugging mugs.
You're looking for Mountain Dew. This late, you want Mountain Dew.
He ate all the office candy too. Oh man, I don't even know if I can go to work tomorrow now.
So, but we do arguably have a half a dozen of the best interns out there who are currently competing against each other in a hackathon. All the cool information, you can see it here. Feel free to give them a shout out. And if you want to comment on which team name you like best. So if we come back down here a little bit, let's see. Yeah, so there's the Hack Street Boys, and then there was the Boolean Hooligans, I believe.
Both good names. Oh, and look at that. Who made a celebrity appearance back there in the kitchen? Probably putting some ice in
Proof
his
that Jared
cup.
does work there as well. He's hiding in the corner.
Oh, man.
So.
I feel included now. I can't believe I made it on TV.
Well, for loose definitions of on TV. Oh, and Joseph also threw the LinkedIn thing for Intelitech as well. We have all the socials. Feel free to follow and like. And if there are any senior engineers interested, we are always on the hunt. Okay. Something. Okay, so working theory on the bug. Working theory. Are you working on the budget app? Sort of. We are working on the installer for it. So, kind of. There it is. Okay, so my theory is, just like you said, how this is schemaless. However, it's not completely schemaless. That feels like a weird word. Lacking schema? Remember, every entity that goes into a table has to implement iTable entity. I'm wondering if that's what's biting us. One of those not being set. Okay. Okay, I'm going to go out on a limb and guess that would make a lot of sense. So if we look here, we expand out this whole ugly thing. Okay, so So etag is empty, partition key is set, timestamp is not set. I'm wondering if timestamp. Okay. I'm willing to bet that this is. Let me go look real quick. So when in doubt, let's see. I'm willing to bet on their. This is one of the things about the getting started guides is sometimes there's key details like that are done in the examples and you don't realize how incredibly important they are until you try to do it yourself and you forget them. Let's see, quick starts, samples.net. Let's see, setting up, create the stuff, create new app, don't care. Create an item. So you'll note, here's their item. They just directly implemented iTable entity for anybody who wants to follow along at home. Let's see. There's that. We're going to ignore their use of nullable reference types because, Twitch. See, but they didn't set so they set row key and partition key. Those two are very much set.
Is that how you added the item? Was the add entity async?
Add entity async. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, you did. On the table on the release class, did you add a timestamp?
I didn't set a timestamp, but I can see that the partition key is set. Oh, you know what else I did? That may have not been a very nice thing to do. You'll see how these ones here on these three guys here, it has this fully qualified name. I wonder if it's doing something stupid and like using reflection over it and not finding these. Because row key is clearly set, partition key is clearly set, but partition key is implemented not as a regular property. So you'll note on their sample, they just did regular properties. And I got clever and was like, oh, I know what I'll do. I'll hide those away behind explicit interface implementations. I have a strong suspicion that somebody may have used reflection rather than a cast. And so even though what I did is valid C# and clearly compiles, I have a theory that's the problem. That if you do an explicit interface implementation for one of the iTable entry members, it gets confused, throws up its hands, and dies. That's my theory. Because I know that you aren't allowed to have members called like row key or partition key. These are magical names that they are not yours to play with. Let's try. Okay, and go. And we think. And we hit the breakpoint.
I was looking away. What did you change?
So I changed it from explicit interface members to default. So it used to look like this.
Oh.
And then...
Yeah, wait a minute. Why? What was your reasoning for putting that there?
My reason by making them explicit interface members, it means they don't show up when I do release dot. They don't explicit interface properties.
Okay, because you don't care.
Yeah, and I didn't want somebody accidentally setting something, and by somebody I mean me, accidentally setting something that they really shouldn't.
And so can we just set those to a init then?
I don't know if you can. Only init might work. Init might work.
Because then you don't risk somebody accidentally.
Well, they could still set it. They would just be limited in where. They'd have to do it in an initializer. Let me relaunch this one more time because I should have hit my breakpoint. Did I remove my breakpoint? Oh, I did remove my breakpoint. Oh, interesting. Now I'm actually curious. Hang on. Now I have to go check and make sure there's not a record sitting in there. Oh! That's the problem. Do not use explicit interface members for iTable entities. No worky. Somebody's using reflection. Don't use implicitly. Someone said to me once. So it is worth noting. So the only reason that came to my mind is because I know that if you do type of release, right, get properties, if you do something like this, you will not find explicit interface properties coming back. They don't come back in this set.
And that's what you want, right?
That's what I would prefer, but apparently something in Table Client is requiring it. Because I'm guessing that it was the partition key that I made an explicit member, that it said, oh, well, partition key is no longer set anymore. It's like, yes, it is. Knock it off. Knock it off. It's right there. But because I had done iTable entity, I'm guessing when it went looking for its partition key on the object, it probably used reflection and said, hey, give me the property with type partition key. And the reflection came back and said, it doesn't exist. Because when you do explicit interface members, you could have theoretically multiple things called partition key. Now, what they should have done is cast to iTable entity and then just pulled the partition key off of it, because that would have worked. So, yeah. Okay, so that fixes it. That fixes it. Okay, so that gets it in. So technically, we have an endpoint working. Hang on. Commit immediately. Heading of
nobody breathe.
Releases to table. Boom. Commit. Push. There. Huzzah. Also, yay, get cracking. Okay.
There's one of your 4 a year, right? You send the timestamp to get cracking. Be like, look, I have an ambassador. There's this.
I have to push get cracking. 1, because it's amazing. 2, because it's awesome. And 3 because I'm an bastard. That's what you do.
I'm trying to get there. I want those socks, man.
Note to self: everyone, give Jared the Get Kraken referrals. He needs them. He needs socks. Actually, you know what? If they do a white elephant gift exchange this year for the company party, I think I know what I'm getting.
Well, hold on. No, whoa. White elephant is like, isn't that like where you can
Correct.
steal and stuff?
But they.
Well, don't do that.
Well,
Why don't you just?
This is what I'm trying to make it. I'm trying to make it interesting, though. Usually the guidance that comes is bring a gift that you wouldn't mind going home with. That's usually the general guidance that comes. And personally, would I mind going home with another pair of Get Kraken socks? Absolutely not. Will there be fighting? Absolutely. It'll be great.
Yeah, don't do that. You can Secret Santa me. How about that? I won't even see it coming.
Okay, you have to promise to forget between now and December, though.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so that actually is in and working. So now's the question. Okay, so Jared, where should we go next?
I think we start. So, you had kind of hard coded so much. Now we kind of start backing up and making these. They're not really useful right now. They're useful ones.
Well, but I can technically add multiple versions here. So here's the next thought is, choices. Option 1, we can look at, I think what we are going to need is for the Simply budget, or actually for any desktop pipeline, at the end of the day, I want to make this process, because there's another step that needs to be done here now, right? And we could go and add it here where it does effectively a invoke on the service. Because
I was going to say, because we're really not doing anything. We're just returning an okay, saying, well, if that was for the create,
correct.
That was for the add the release. So that we don't have a get release set up yet.
We do. And that one is actually in. So we could go through and test it, though we did test it last time, so I'm pretty confident in it. So the get, and it's the getting of the releases. So this is the one that's actually going to end up reading from that. So it'll pull from it.
Okay.
So we could go through and actually spin some multiple releases and give that a try and make sure it works. That's one option. We could, I think for the pipeline, what I might end up doing is let's actually add that to Simply Budget's pipeline, to where it's going to invoke it, create a new release that we can install, and watch the update work. That sounds good to me. Let's do that. Yeah. Okay, so here, boom, boom, boom. So we'll do some YAML-y stuff. Okay, so down here, after it makes this, because we want it to update the release first, right? So name, what do we call this? Update service. I don't know. I'm bad at naming. Run. And because it's YAML and dumb, we do this. And then, let's see, this is guaranteed to run on Windows, so my run command is guaranteed to be PowerShell. So I can actually get away with that, which is exciting. And then we just need the endpoint out in real people land. Right? So if we go here, I need this endpoint here. And then I need this thing here, so it's going to be, I want to let me copy that. Okay, Swagger, feature request. I want to copy this. /app/up. Okay. You're annoying me. Because I can't spell, so if I try to type such few characters, I'm going to get beat up. And you'll note, I'm already conscious of the fact that this doesn't have the app on here. It's already going to mess me up. Already trying.
I'll back you up.
I'm counting on that. So app/boing. And so in this case, the app name will be Simply Budget. And then it wants to take in some parameters. Right? So we've got version tag and channel. So let's see. Version is going to be this guy. Version equals that. That'll be fine, right?
You weren't even passing in a tag before, right? You were just assuming in the controller that they were equal?
You make a good point. Don't get fancy. We'll do just this. That'll be the same two parameters that I passed. This thing will go through. It'll be wonderful. It'll be glorious. Let's push it. What could go wrong? Testing, invoking service. I'm also... Hang on. Before we get too carried away. Just hypothetically, let's just try to run this locally to I don't know, make sure it works. Right, before we get too carried away. So if I do, we already know 1.0 is out there. So if I do version 1.1.1, right, and I do this.
You still need the invoke web request,
right.
Don't you?
See, this is why. For anybody not familiar with PowerShell, IWR is shorthand for the commandlet invoke-web request.
Is it a string?
Oh, the parameter?
That
it should convert. I'm actually surprised it's taking more than a second. See that right there. That
thing's gone.
I am not firing up Internet Explorer just to make this thing happy. Use basic parsing. I am not turning on Internet Explorer. See, 500 error. Now we're making progress. We have managed to crash and die. So that's exciting. So before we commit this and push it, let's just assume that it's not going to work.
So hold on though. Pause for a second. You're running. So this is the app service even running? Oh, it is. I thought you were just running.
I was running locally when I was using Swagger. So,
okay.
But the local run and the app service are both pointed at the same storage account. So those are both pointed at the cloud ones. This guy here now apparently is 500ing. Apparently it is doing stuff.
What's the role based, or what's the access privileges for the app service?
That was the identity that we set up. So that is a great question. So this guy is turned on.
That was to the table storage though.
Correct.
Right. But
this is the app service that I'm looking at. So the identity associated with the app service, which is effectively the user that the service will run as.
Sorry. So what is what's the protocol for who can call that app service?
Anyone. Wide open, completely unauthenticated.
And where do you see was that in the controller? Is that how you know that?
Yes.
Because we said run unauthorized.
Well, so I didn't decorate anything with authorization, and I actively went through the I was going to say, I actually went through and attempted to turn off most of the authorization to ensure that none of it would be authenticated. Because none of this is going to have normal authentication. Any authentication that actually does get added is going to basically be API keys. Because at the end of the day, I'm going to end up with a bunch of apps that need to invoke this, and I'd like to register the apps, have that generate an API key, and then in my pipeline, just like when you do like a NuGet push, how you have to specify an API key, I want to do the same sort of API key thing in my service. Now, the important thing to note is those API keys don't actually get sent on the wire. So typically they use something called Hmac, which something message access control, I think, if I'm remembering the acronym correctly. The idea is that key is used to sign the payload rather than be part of the payload. so that anybody sniffing traffic in the middle won't actually see the key go. And more importantly, if they capture one of those packets and just try to replay it, it won't allow replays either. So it's actually a wonderful, wonderful thing.
Hash-based message authentication.
Dang it, I was close. I had some of the words in there.
You were way closer than I would have ever forgotten.
But that...
So that's interesting. I guess I would assume, since Azure just has layers and layers and layers of like authentication, I would have thought not only what you put in your program, startup, and not only what you put in your controller, I would have thought that app service within the portal would have another setup and say, well, I guess it's not behind like an APIM.
Yeah, if you put an APIM or something in front of it, you can certainly do something like that. But by default, if you don't add anything, you get it all for free. Oh, okay. So step one, cool. I'm just going to turn on Swagger for all the things, delete that endpoint, and I'm going to push. So back to here. Let's see. More Swagger, less security. Because there's no way that's going to bite me. So everybody watching, please don't do anything bad to my service. Thank you. We're gonna go on the
more Swagger, less.
We're gonna go on the honor system for the moment. Now, the nice part is last time, I don't know if you caught it, we got it done rather quickly. We built a pipeline that built and deployed this app service. I think it took about 3 minutes. It may have been about 3 minutes to build the entire pipeline. It was pretty epic. It was pretty, yeah. So for anybody who wants to know how to do it yourself, you create an app service in Azure, you come down to the deployment center, and in my case, I had already connected it to my GitHub account. And then normally, if you haven't done this, there's a button you click that's next, finish, and it creates a GitHub action, does the publish profile, adds it to your secrets and all that jazz. And you're done. Yeah,
really? You didn't have to write GitHub Actions all in YAML as well, right?
Yep.
Just like a pipeline. You didn't have to write anything?
Correct. It genned all of this for me. I don't think we edited this at all. And you can kind of tell that it genned it for me because I did not name my secret Azure App Service publish profile 19C0551398, etc. I'll save you the rest. I do not name my secrets this way.
You don't? Just me, huh? Just me
just
and
you. And I'm trying to remember. I feel like I may have configured like where it had the name my app. I may have tweaked one of the paths or something, but we basically did almost no changes to it. So by default, if you connect your Azure account back to your app service, life is more easier. And then you get a working pipeline. Okay, and we're deployed. Huzzah! See, what's that? CI/CD just makes me so happy every time it works. Where's my URL? Hello. Huh? Am I the only one who thinks that my URL should be there? Is it hiding behind a slot? My app service died and needs a swift kick. I'm not opposed to giving it a swift kick.
Just a little choke out.
Okay.
There it is.
Don't scare me, Azure. I have great faith in you. Okay, so if I do this, I go Swagger. Okay, Swagger works. Huzzah. Okay, so if I come in here and I try this out and I go simply budget and I do 1.2.3, that'll be our test run. Execute.
200.
Okay, was this not the exact same? Hang on. Let's go back here. What did I do wrong here? Isn't this...
You side by side it?
Well, it's this line and this line.
Oh.
Because here's the old one, here's the new one.
Well, you did change. You did
use
remove,
off. You're right.
Yeah.
Okay,
there you go.
maybe that was it. Maybe that was it. Okay, let's just validate real quick that in my account, we should have some records.
I gotta step away for 2 seconds.
Go for it.
I'll be right back.
I will talk to myself and be quite content. Okay, that all looks nice. So let's just blow away those. Okay. Okay, so now we come back over to Simply Budget, and this should, just gonna hypothetically just paste this in. All right, and we're gonna do this, and this should now register up, and so I should be able to do installs of this thing and have it just work. We're gonna see what happens. Okay, so there's that. So go here, invoking service, commit change. So if everything goes to plan, I should be able to download and install the 1.0 release. Let's do that real quick. So I should be able, this should work. So if I go here, and I'm gonna go test release, I'm gonna download this setup installer. So the default setup installer, you'll note, is a little bigger than the full package because this thing is full package plus Bootstrap. Keep the file. Keep anyway. Trust me, I built the file. I'm pretty confident it's safe. Okay, so I've got the 1.0 installer. So I'm gonna open this guy up, and we're gonna just make a new folder real quick. New folder. Okay, Jared, we're gonna go for gold.
Okay,
well,
what'd I miss?
All I did was push the pipeline for Simply Budget. Okay, so we downloaded the 1.0 installer, and I'm just going to name it as such. Okay, so this is the installer from the 1.0 release that's out on GitHub now. So we're going to run it, okay. And then the convenient part about this guy, one, it should work. That's an important detail. It's also possible it's just going to crash and die. Okay, it launched. Okay, perfect. So it launched, and you'll note it does include the version number up at the top. So this little bit here in the header is what we're going for. So it launches, and by default, when it fires up, it generates a default set of stuff. And actually, for the purposes of my testing, I actually have it randomly generate a bunch of data like back 6 months or whatever. So it just makes stuff up. So none of these numbers are real. They don't line up to anything of significance. They're literally Kevin's test data. Okay, now if I go here, because I think we should be able to test this thing end to end. I think.
We should, one of these days, we should probably fix a typo on there.
Uh-oh.
I think budget is with one T.
It's a good Details. Thing that the user base for this application cannot spell at all.
I think it looks really cool though. I might go try it out.
You are welcome to. If you have questions about it, feel free to let me know. Like I said, because I think I mentioned this to Joe as well, is it is very much built for me and the workflow that I like, but anyone is welcome to use it. Okay, so we are going to create a release, and so this will be the 1.0.1 because this is actually more or less the exact same code. 1.0.1. Okay. Publish. And now it's going to work flawlessly, and everyone will be excited, and there will be cheering and all that stuff. Okay. So the only thing that kind of bothers me a little bit. Oh, this is from my push in. So this may actually take a minute to run, I just realized, because it has tests and stuff that it does.
You wrote tests
for your
Simply Budget?
Well, so
Right on.
It took, I think, 4 revs before I started writing tests. And this is one of the projects that actually convinced me of the importance of always writing unit tests. Because when I first started, it was such a simple app. I'm like, I don't need tests. I can easily just click through this. And oh my word, it did not take very long before I was so deep in, and I'm like, I kept breaking stuff and things were getting frustrating. I'm like, this is unmanageable. And especially like, because then new .NET versions came out and I wanted to update and things weren't working the way I expected. And I'm like, oh, what happens if I drop this package library and go over to this one? And oh my word, everything just fell apart. And I got so frustrated. So it doesn't have great test coverage, but I've been working on fixing past mistakes, because I will call that a past mistake. It was bad. Very, very bad. Okay, because if this works, this would be kind of cool, because this would mean that now we can go end to end all the way through. And then there's a bunch of to-dos and like stop hard coding all the things. But at least then the system works, which would be kind of cool.
I think it'd be a great
one thing
start.
that okay, so while we're waiting on that, Azure Dev CLI. So I don't know if people have seen this thing. This thing's kind of new. The Azure Developer CLI. This is not AZ. This is AZD, because that will not confuse anyone. Link. This guy here is all about making it really easy for example, for projects like this, if you were to want to run it yourself in your subscription, you would have to go and create all of the relevant Azure bits, right? Which, fine, isn't terrible currently, because it's a very simplest, like, it's an app service, a storage account, and you got to do some identity stuff to get all the pieces plugged together. Not horrible, could document it, could be easy. However, imagine if all you had to do to get it stood up in your environment was AZD up, pass it a template, and then magically all of your stuff just works. And you have all of the needed Azure bits registered and fired up. Pretty cool. This is normally what I would previously use Terraform for, but this is making me want to take a run at what's called Bicep. Because let's see, there was ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager, which are big, ugly. Here, I'll show you what an ARM template looks like. It's very easy. Where is the export template button here? And this is arguably a biased way of doing this, because this is, if you wanted to make a template as ugly as possible, this is what it would look like. Big ugly. Nobody wants to spin up their resources like this. No one. Everyone I've seen use ARM templates, they go to the export, they copy, they edit what they need, and then they paste. And it's ugly. Bicep is much cleaner. Have you done any Terraform or Bicep work?
No, I have not.
That will be fixed at some point. But this guy leverages Bicep to effectively spin up and then, more importantly, tear back down. So if you have like a sample that you want people to play with, AZD up, and then it creates all of the stuff. It can deploy your services for you, and then when you're done, AZD down, and you're done. That's pretty. And that
interesting. So you can go in there, you can export your template and hand that template to somebody, and they could just do ADZ up with that template, and then boom, they have a kind of a mirror copy of your infrastructure.
Yeah, you have to set the template. You have to set up appropriately. So there's some well-known architect or layout stuff that things have to be plugged in order to make this thing all work. And then the hard part is actually adding in all the Bicep files so that you can register things up. So, for example, you will need a couple parameters for like Azure location, environment name, principal ID, because some things you're going to need to either query out of the user running it out of their AZ to pull it. But it looks it looks pretty cool in my opinion. Okay.
A little bit cleaner.
Yep. Okay, so this guy ran, which is good. He ran successfully, which is what's most shocking. If we look at the 1.0 release, you'll note that it did build up the release notes, which were pretty boring, considering the only release notes were testing invoking service. But it did build up all of the relevant files. It added them here. If we look at this releases file, and open it. Hey, open with code. Oh, interesting. I don't know what this is going to do now. I just realized it didn't build this correctly. And the reason it didn't build it correctly is because in order to build this file correctly, it would need to download the existing one first before running the Cloud Squirrel CLI. Oh, interesting. I didn't think about that. So before running this Squirrel pack command, it expects the Squirrel pack command where it has this, where is it? Output directories. This release directory. It expects this release directory to contain the releases manifest file, as well as the previous version's NuGet package. Because without, it needs the previous version's NuGet package to create a Delta package, and it needs the releases file to be able to append to it. So I don't actually know what this is going to do when it queries this. Let's find out.
You'd think it would just return like a bad request or something.
Yeah, well, I don't know. So theoretically, what's going to happen when I launch the app is it's going to call out to the app service to say, give me that manifest. The manifest, in theory, if we go back to here, so assuming everything's working the way we expect, when it calls out to the service to say, give me the latest manifest, it should call into here, figure out that this is the latest version, use the information here to go and download that releases thing. And actually, we can test that real quick because we've got this thing open. Idiot. So let's start with this. When it calls and it says, hey, by the way, I am app simply budget. I am channel foo because nobody cares about you. And I am looking for the releases file, right? It is called releases. Yeah. What do I get back? So if I hit execute,
not found.
Interesting. So that's not a, so that's what's going to happen. It's going to get a 404 and fail to do the update, which isn't quite what I was hoping for. But now I'm curious why it's getting a not found. So let's run, if we run the service locally, because it's pointed at the same thing, we can figure out why. So simply budget foo releases. And then I'm going to just put a breakpoint in my controller method. And let's see what's happened. So it comes here. Okay, great. It should match, which it does. We call into here. Great. Let's see, get latest release. It's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking, it's thinking. Thinking a real long time. Okay, that took a very long time and did not find a release. Interesting. Let's go see what that method did. Set next statement. This is by far, you've seen that set next statement thing, right?
I've just usually
dragged it back.
Drag the instruction pointer.
Go back one and try again. Okay, so let's see if we just aren't getting items back from the query. Oh, so we're not getting items back from the query. So the query in question, let's see, step out is which one? Version is null. So it should be looking for where app name is simply budget.
And channel.
Oh, because some moron used the channel name of foo instead of a channel name of production. So remember how I said channel was completely unused? It's completely unused except for the places where I used it. which is
that happens.
Oh. Okay, so the solution here is this. Problem solved.
Well, so the idea was that you would, this comes back to that old Yagni. You thought you were going to use, you still think you're going to use the channel at some point, and so the idea is there would be two resources with the same app name, but they would have different channel names.
Or the idea being that I want to release a beta version of my app and test it in my beta environment before letting it go out to production or similar. Let's try this again. And actually, when this thing calls, it's not even going to have a channel. So I can't have this as a required parameter. Or can I? Oh, I can't.
Well, you could put whatever you want, right? Because it's getting handed in there on line 32.
Well, right, but I need to. The problem is because I've made it part of the route, I have to make sure that it's actually set on the update call. So let's first make sure that we get back a reasonable URI for it. So go and think, figure yourself out. I am wondering, given the slowness of creating those table clients, if I really should keep those things cached. Okay, so it got one, it just got the wrong one. Okay, so let's go back here, set next statement. So get latest release is coming back with the 1.0 one. And 1.0 is not latest. So let's step in here. Okay, so I expect to get two items. Okay, item 1, 1.0, right? Latest is null, therefore latest gets assigned. Second item, 1.1. Okay. Oh, did I mess up something in my comparer? So this is Kevin code, so don't panic. And I always hate writing comparers because I always I wonder if I got my ones and negative ones backwards, which is really plausible, or my regex somewhere. So it regexes out the versions from each of these. So, and you'll note, because I was being clever, I even decided to handle the NuGet preview package stuff. Compare group major, those are equal. Compare group minor, those are equal. Compare group patch, -1. Interesting. -1. Oh, so that's correct though, right? If the first one, which in this case is X, 1.1 is X, 1.01 is Y, -1 is the expected compare, right? -1, it's earlier. I believe that's correct. Why am I feeling stupid? That is not.
Don't. You've got a lot going on here.
Less than 0 means X is less than Y. 0, X equals Y. Greater than 0, X is greater than Y. Yes.
So go back to your code though. What were you returning?
So in this case, I am returning -1. X is less than Y. That is correct.
Okay.
So my compare is correct. Oh, my issue is here because this guy, this should be less than or equal here. And theoretically, equal should really never occur. So if X is early, or I should phrase this differently. If Y is greater than X, then do the assignment. That's the problem. My Boolean. See, this is another good example where a unit test could have been remarkably helpful. And you'll note the lack of a test project here, and I'm realizing that I'm an idiot. and I should really have a test project. See? Yes.
Tests are good.
Tests would have probably saved me on that one. Okay, so that... We're just going to go for gold here real quick. Try it again. Okay. Fixing logic issues. Commit. Push. Now, I do want to find the update manager class. Why is that not being done? Did I not actually set up doing updates inside of here? Did I only set up doing installs? I might not have set up doing updates. Was I really that dumb? I could have sworn we did that last time. Would I have put that in the window? There it is. Yeah, update manager. Why didn't you find that? Okay. Here's the update logic. I was like, man, I could have sworn I wrote this last time. So here is the logic for doing the update. And this does get a little funky because I decided to be clever. But this is the Cloud Squirrel update class. It checks first if the app was installed with an installer, because if you just F5 it won't be installed. Therefore, this will be false. So step 1, make sure that we were actually installed with an installer. I've hard-coded my channel to production because that's the only thing that exists. Oh, and I've set my update location to be localhost. So this is not going to go to my service. This is going to be no worky. So let's do...
All those hard codes are coming back to get us.
It's almost like somebody in their infinite wisdom said, Kevin, don't do this. That one. Okay, so that will be better, which does mean I now need to publish another one. And there's an app ID, there's a channel. This will do the update. Okay, I'm going to push this. Okay, but I am also aware of the fact that it's 11 o'clock, and I promised you we weren't going to go too late. See, this is what happens when I rabbit trail.
I think this is probably, of all the streams I've watched, the least rabbit trail stream. And it's probably because I'm not in chat asking off-the-wall questions.
You're in my ear asking the questions.
I tried to keep them fairly on
You
point
did good,
tonight.
and I think this is getting close to something that I can actually say is working, and then dial back all of the hard codey bits.
Absolutely. So. Yeah, let's see if this one does what we want it to do. But yes, our little one usually gets up about 5:30.
Yeah, so what I heard is bedtime. So I will tell you what, I'm going to kick this guy off as a starting point, and then I'm going to propose we call it, so that, because this will take several minutes to publish and do all of the things. And then more importantly, after this guy publishes, I'm actually going to need to publish a 1.3.0 to actually see the update path work. Because I'll have to download 1.2.0 directly, install that one manually. Because the one I have installed now is looking at localhost for the updates, which isn't going to do a darn thing. And then push it out. At some point, I should probably make that URL configurable in its app settings or similar. That way I can tweak it without having to do builds and all that stuff, but that sounds like work. But for next time. But Jared, thank you for coming on. I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me. It was I felt like I really wasn't any help, but I enjoyed it.
Well, I enjoyed having you on, and it's always great when other people are willing to come and join and do that kind of stuff. And if people are interested in poking at these projects and helping out, let me know. I'm happy to grant people level of access into my cloud stuff. You will not get access to whole subscription, just the resource group. I'm not dumb enough to release all the things, but if people do want to poke around and play with this kind of stuff, like I said, always happy to have people around. So, Jared, thanks again. I'll see you tomorrow.
Yeah. I'll see you in the morning, and thanks again. Looking forward to the next one.
Everyone else, thanks for joining. Happy coding. See everyone next time.